just so you know that's what's happening. So welcome to the surgery. We've got a few others who have registered and we'll see if they're able to join us. But I'm always mindful of your time and respecting that you're here and in the room. And so let's get our conversation started. So thank you both, Di and Shana, for putting questions into the space. And I'm looking forward to us covering both of those. So what I thought we might do is we will kick off with Di, your question, which I'll share on screen so that we've all got that. If you're happy to speak it into the room, I would love you to, but I never want to put people on the spot. So please go for it. Share your question if you're happy to do that.
Oh gosh, now I've got to remember what the question was. Was it around what is good, but also what is good enough? Was that the question? Yeah.
That's really it. So it was what is the difference between what does good look like and what does good enough look like?
Yeah.
And I think that that's such a beautiful distinction for us to kind of unpack, not only for ourselves, but in the way that we might talk about this with our teams. You know, if you're a parent with the young people in your world, in partnership, whether that's in intimate partnership or partnership in professional worlds, because they're two very distinct things that can both be really in service of us getting clarity around what comes next. So I wrote a little book called What Does Good Look Like? Looks a bit like this. You can't see on the screen there. And because last year I held this question throughout the year. It's a question I use a lot in my own world, in my world with clients, as I coach, as I teach, as I mentor. And this question around what does good look like is really, I believe, around us having an orientation towards which we are moving. And there's a beautiful quote, I think it's Seneca, one of the Stoic kind of philosophers, around no wind is favorable unless we know to which port we are sailing. And so it's this idea of what's our directionality? How do we know if we are moving towards or away from what we want more of or what we want less of? Because what we want less of is something we want to move away from, right? Whereas what we want more of might be something we want to move towards. And there's a beautiful framework called the Choice Points Framework, which can be useful in kind of unpacking what does good look like, because it asks us to think about what's valuable to us, what has priority in terms of our time, our attention, our effort, our emotions. Where do we want to invest? And that's a kind of a whole of life question. But equally, for a team, it can be, what does good look like for us in this meeting? In a conversation, it can be, what does good look like for us to have resolved or to have come to next steps on in the next 20 minutes? As I coach senior executives, because things change so quickly in your worlds, each session I'll kick off with, okay, so we've had those email exchanges, but right now, what does good look like for the next hour that we have together? And something may have happened just that morning that means that is what we need to take a deep dive on, because there's no point us trying to focus on what we emailed about, because this has kind of taken over the whole scenario. So does that make sense in terms of what does good look like? I feel like that's about us setting an orientation, a directionality, but not in some fuzzy way. It's actually saying this is where we are heading towards. This is the port we are sailing towards. And then what does good enough looks like is about how we get there may not be in the way that we think we're going to as we leave port now, right? So what is good enough? Good enough is going, okay, that's good enough now for us to make progress. It doesn't need to be perfect. I don't need to have all the answers, but it's good enough to take the next step and the next step.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Sorry, Chris? That's all right. Please, feel free to jump in at any time. And it allows us to get out of perfectionism and get out of procrastination, right? And it's like, it doesn't need to have all of the answer all of the time. And it doesn't need to be perfect. Is it enough that moves us in the directionality of what we've defined good is? So that's just a kind of an opening framing for the distinction between what does good look like and spending time and effort thinking about that, and then working with a good enough principle to make progress towards it. So Di, let's go to you first, because you beautifully introduced this question into the space. Is there anything that comes up for you as I make? That's a distinction that I make in the book, but I'm only one voice in this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I really like the way you introduced that, the good is this is where we're going, it's our direction, whereas good enough is the things that, you get there, because sometimes you want this, and to get there it is steps, and sometimes you have to, something has to be, something gives, and it's not the thing you want to give, but if you stay stuck in this has to be perfect, you don't get to good because you're stuck back here. So I guess it's finding that way to go, okay, that's good enough to move forward. And it's, I guess, that mindset to be able to go, yeah, I wanted it to be perfect and I wanted all my I's dotted and all my T's crossed, but today they're not going to be. So we either stay here and we get stuck here and we're never going to get to good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I sometimes find useful to put into the space is deeply committed to what does good look like and completely unattached to how we get there. And that helps us then not get too locked into, and this is how it has to look in order for us to get to good. And even completely unattached to good. This is what good looks like with all the data that we have right now in this moment, in this context. And that may change, and that's okay. So it's this deeply committed, unattached kind of tension that we hold. We're making progress, and it might not be with perfect data or perfect style and grace, but we are making progress. And we may need to change tack if the wind changes, and we may need to change the configuration of sales if something else happens, and that's okay. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank
Shana,
you.
Chris, anything you'd like to comment, any reflections, anything that comes up for you in relation to that idea of good and good enough?
I just said in the chat that it's seems that it's a little bit like it's good enough for now.
Exactly.
Or maybe another frame I saw was once you set the goal, you just focus on the process.
Yeah.
So you kind of like set the big goal and you're hiking and it's good, and then you just focus on the walking. And every now and then you reorientate yourself to see if you're still heading in that direction.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And is that still the right direction? Has anything changed? Has the weather changed? Has the terrain changed? Has the energy of the group changed? If we stick with this hiking metaphor, is that still the goal? But once that's set, it's no longer a point useful to keep rechecking that. It's like, no, that's where it is for now, and we are moving towards that. Yeah, love that. Thank you.
Is there a reference that I just looked up choice points? Is there something that you recommend as a good model or reference for that?
So choice points comes out of active commitment therapy. So it's Russ Harris, and it comes out of a book he first wrote with two colleagues whose names leave me at the moment, around weight loss. And it was about that in every moment we have a choice point around whether we are moving towards the person that we want to be, the life we want to live, the goal we want to achieve, the outcome we want to create from this meeting, or we're moving away from it. But we can only know if we're moving towards or away if we've got clarity around what it is that we are aiming for, what it is that we're wanting to create, what good looks like. And so that's why, for me, this question, even as I read Russ's work a while ago, years ago now, but it's the layering of what does good look like as okay, yeah, once that's in place, then this choice points is like I think of it like a water divining tool. And it kind of just, yeah, okay, no, that moves me towards it. No, that moves me away from it. So what moves me towards it, that does. And it's like it then can become a real navigating tool for you. Shana, anything coming up in this for you? Don't feel you have to, but it's, you know, always an invitation to share.
Yeah, I guess a focus for me has been looking at how I can run better meetings. And we have often a very broad stakeholder group. So ensuring that everyone understands their purpose in the meeting is part of some of our challenges. But yeah, so I think this would be helpful at the start of the meeting to define, you know, where are we headed? What do we want to achieve today? Besides the agenda, obviously, but yeah, a bit around yeah, how am I going to contribute to the meeting based on the group's objective of where we're headed?
I think that, and I've used it exactly as a tool for that purpose. When you've got broad stakeholder representation in a meeting, and whilst the meeting may have been convened by one of those stakeholder groups and have a formal agenda, there will be a number of other informal agendas in the room. And so to state explicitly, so what good looks like in terms of the formal agenda of this meeting is ABC. But of course, we're always interested to hear what good looks like for each of the groups or each of you in the room. So I wonder if we might take a couple of minutes, give them each like a post-it note. And if you could answer that question, what does good look like for you as you come out of this meeting? What are you hoping for, or what do you need, or what do you want? So you could do a hope, need, want, because they're slightly different things. And actually invest. It's worth investing, I reckon, anything between 10 and 20 minutes, even in a meeting that's only an hour, because then they can go up onto a flip chart or onto a something. You can take 2 minutes, 5 minutes for people to read those. There's no conversation around it. It's just about there being a collective understanding of some of the hopes, desires, needs, and wants in the room. And there also then is no commitment that they are all going to be met. And it's about making that explicit as well. We may not be able to meet all of these needs, all of these wants, all of these hopes within this formal meeting kind of what does good look like. But to put them in the room gives us a sense of how we might be able to as we move through the next period of time together. So that can be a really useful, it has to be quite tightly managed and facilitated, but it can be a useful way to use the what does good look like tool and the question, what does good enough look like? So that, you know, in those meetings when there's diverse stakeholder groups and they get stuck on one detail, because this group is saying this and this group is saying that, and they're just in that detail, it can help us come out of that and go, what does good enough look like for now? And so that knowing that we'll come back and revisit this at the next meeting, is there a good enough point that we can reach now so that we can move on with the conversation? So that's how these two questions can really be used in service of and with each other.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Pleasure, pleasure. Di, is that something that you're familiar with, that kind of scenario with big stakeholder groups, different perspectives on things?
Yeah, so I do a lot of quality improvement project work. So yeah, you're pulling together different stakeholders with that project work. So yes, where you sort of go, just what you said then about, you know, they've got this, they want this and they want that. It's like, yeah, where is you good enough for this meeting? Where can we go? Okay, we've got that point. I think that's really, because sometimes people do get caught up on their perspective. So to sort of do, okay, is this good enough? It's not good, but is it good enough? I think that's really a great way of moving forward in that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for popping that overview into chat there. That's a really useful one. I use choice points in my book on accountability, Own It. And that was one of the references that I used for that. It's a great overview. Russ really distills it down succinctly there. Cool, thank you. Anything else, Di, around that? Or do you feel like we've pulled that kind of the nuance apart, talked about how we could use those two questions in a practical way?
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really given some clarity around that. Thank you.
Fabulous, that's great. Okay, so on to your question, Shana. And I love this question. This has come up a couple of times in kind of these conversations, but because we always have a different mix of people in the room with different systems behind them. So Shana, do you want to speak your question into the room? You happy to?
Yes, again, like Di, I think I need to remember, and I only got it. It was not enough characters to complete what I was writing, but I loved the statement in your little book, Good Enough, around that we don't have to take on complex systems. That I can't remember the term you used, but it was something about islands of sanity.
Islands of sanity, yeah. And look, full attribution here. This beautiful phrase, islands of sanity, is a phrase by a researcher and systems kind of operator and thinker called Margaret Wheatley. She's is she a professor? She's certainly a doctor, Dr. Margaret Wheatley. And she talks about islands of sanity, and it's one of my favorite pieces of her work. She was one of the earliest researchers into complex systems. So there's her and a lady called Donella Meadows who talk about different leverage points to create system change. Right now, the challenge that we have with complex systems is that the complexity overwhelms us. And although Donella identified that there are kind of 9 levels of intervention that we can access, 9 levels of leverage point, from kind of the most shallow that have really the least impact on system change, right through to the deepest levels, which fundamentally change the paradigm of the system. So if I give you a kind of, so there's most shallow level is the messages and communication into the system. And the deepest level, that means that the whole system has a paradigm shift, is the mindset of the power brokers and leaders in the system, right? Which is why, for me, as a systems thinker who works in the leadership space, once we change leader mindsets, understanding we all have the opportunity to be a leader moment to moment, that is how we create system change from the inside out, right? So we can tinker around in data and messages and processes and inflows and outflows, but all of that, it's a bit like going to a system chiropractor. All of that goes chunk, 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 once you change the mindset of the people in the system. Because it's the mindset and the people in the system that then determine what data is sought, what questions is asked, what processes are designed. So it's like that chiropractor, clunk, 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 clunk. So that's like letting go of being able to change large complex systems is letting go of it's accepting the ineffectiveness of the nature of so much change that is attempted to be done with large complex systems, because it's these surface level leverage points that really create not strong enough ripples through a system to sustain the change. Is that clear? Does that anything come up, or any questions around that? That's kind of the starting premise.
Yeah, I guess so a lot of our work is with community, and so yeah, it's a kind of a funny juxtaposition in that we need to listen to community, be led by community, but also provide expertise, advice, direction as well. So it's a bit of a give and take, and obviously big wicked problems,
Yeah.
including impacts of, you know, climate change issues as well, plus the complexities of what happens in communities,
Yeah.
all the different factors that so yeah, just it was a bit of a like, oh, I can let my shoulders down a little bit
Yes.
just thinking about islands of sanity, and instead of trying to you know, look at the whole thing, just to go, here's where we can have some influence, or this is where we can, you know, spend our time and energy at the moment. Well, you know, there's still certain mindsets within community, and obviously each community is different, so you have to take different approaches with all
Yeah.
of them.
And that's exactly it, is that what we end up, the way that we end up approaching large complex system change is through a patchwork of islands of sanity. Because whilst we may not be able to influence mindset shift across a large complex system, we can create mindset shift within our sphere of influence. Now, we can think about this at multiple levels, as we do in systems. So we can think about it as an individual leader. How do I create an island of sanity through the influence that I have in the world? And your island of sanity could be your family, your friendship group, your team in your workplace, the netball team or the volunteer group or the sporting club that you ref at, or whatever that looks like. That is your island of sanity. And so it does come back to, and so much of this comes back to, it starts with each of us choosing to create an island of sanity in the way that we show up and in the way that we lead ourselves and are with others in the world. And then how is it that your team creates an island of sanity, or your family creates an island of sanity that then has ripples out because of the collective influence that you have in your system? So for me, I have 2 young adult women as daughters. So one is at university, one's in the final years of school. And I know that the island of sanity that I've created in our family, the ripples of that go out into their friendship group because of how they show up in those young adult friendship groups. I know that the islands of sanity that I create through my leadership programs and the coaching and the teaching and the keynoting I do have more, it's not exactly distributed, but I can't know the islands of sanity or the ripples that are created from that. And yet, just the other day, I got an email back from someone I taught in a master's program 6 years ago, and she highlighted for me 3 what she called Dr. Page mega moments. And I had no idea, and they fundamentally changed the trajectory of her life. And so these are the things where it's the island of sanity that we first create is the one that we choose to create with ourselves. And then what does that mean in terms of how we show up, and the island of sanity we create with a family, with a team, with your team in the workplace, actually putting this idea of what is the island of sanity we would want to create? How would we want to define that? What does it mean for us to live to that? And what can feel like the chaos and madness of complexity, how is it that we create an island of sanity, like first and foremost for ourselves, so that we can show up and sustain high-performing, effective, compassionate leadership in this system complexity? And then how is it that we can have a ripple effect out because of what we're holding for, with, and ourselves too, in terms of how we are showing up? How does that sit with you, Shana?
I love it. And I think it also connects into your anti-fragility around, particularly around reality. And yeah, facing yourself in this is reality, and yeah, you're not expecting it to be something else.
Absolutely. So it speaks to two pieces of work across the anti-fragile, which is the reality versus expectations. And the bigger the gap between that, and we create the gap, is the suffering pit, right? And if we're in the suffering pit, we can no longer help ourselves or be in service of others. So when I think about the specific nature of your work, and just to give some context to Shana's work, she works at the Surf Coast Shire here on the Great Ocean Road in a community support, but to do with, Shana, you give me
Emergency management.
Emergency management.
So we support communities and agencies in response, preparedness and recovery to emergencies. So bushfires, floods, storms, but also things like pandemics and foot and mouth disease, or yeah.
And so these massive events, these are not things that you can control. And in Anti-Fragile, I talk about how is it we discern between what we can control, what we can't control, and what we can influence, and make sure that we're really focusing on the things that we can control, ultimately ourselves, and how we choose to show up moment to moment, which brings us back to choice points, right? And the things that we have the greatest degree of influence on. Because the things that we can't control, the things that we have a lesser degree of influence on, they will just be an absolute pit for our attention, our energy, our motivation, our inspiration. And if we're pouring all of that into that pit, then we're not able to give that to the things that we could actually make a difference with. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just one thing that came to mind before I kind of open up the conversation is this difference between complicated and complex. I heard a beautiful distinction of these two things the other day. I'm just going to refer to my notes because it was a way that I hadn't heard it. So Sister is out of the Santa Fe Institute of Complex Systems, I think, and I hadn't kind of referenced their work before. But complicated system scenarios need intelligence, and that is what it takes to solve a complicated challenge. Whereas complex systems, what I would call the adaptive leadership calls this, oh, don't worry about that. Complex situations, complex systems ask for understanding. So complicated requires intelligence, and generally it's about finding an answer that has already been established and working it through, a bit like getting a new iPhone and working through the manual of how to run it. But a complex scenario or system, there is no known answer. What it requires is operating from a basis of seeking understanding. And I think that is, you have aspects of both, because your larger system is complicated in that you're part of a bureaucracy, you're part of local government. There's lots of complicated processes and layers and things to navigate. But the nature of your system and the work that you do is complex because there's such a high human quotient involved. And the nature of what is going on is not predictable, very changeable. And so it requires understanding, because the knowledge just isn't there, because it's those particular conditions may never have come together in this way before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, so two things there. One is this letting go of changing complex systems, because unless we're getting to the mindset, which is changing the understanding within the complex system, the rest of the stuff is kind of tinkering at the edges.
Mm.
And then this idea of islands of sanity is about, first, how do we want to show up? How do I want to show up in this system in a positive way? But in a way, that also means that we are not broken by the system, because we can't be in service to it and with it if it is crushing us. Chris, Di, would love any comments, thoughts you have around this as the idea of complex and complicated, complex systems, islands of sanity, anything there that kind of lights you up, or you've got a reflection or would like to share?
But I've got a quote that Shana might like. I'll share in a minute though. Did you say Margaret Wheatley?
Yes, yeah, Meg Wheatley, yes.
Meg Wheatley.
Yeah, she's known as both, but yes.
And it was called Complex, the 9 Levers. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, so that's the work of Donella Meadows.
Okay.
Yeah, so 2 different amazing women, both working in the systems space.
9 Levers of
System change. Yeah.
Shana, this is a great quote. Dr. Page will probably know it. Well, it's Jim Stockwell, who was a Vietnam War pilot that got shot down. And he says, you must never confuse must never confuse your faith that you'll prevail in some way with the brutal honesty of the facts of your situation, the way he put it. And so what people try to do is the brutal facts of the situation are so horrible for them that they then try to change. They try to change them and make them a bit easier. And he says you've got to be completely truthful about where you are and believe that you'll prevail.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really nicely. And he said that the people who didn't get out of he was a Viet Cong prisoner for 7 years. The ones that didn't make it were the ones that thought they'd be home by Christmas, which is sort of the opposite advice. The ones that thought, oh man, I'm in deep shit, excuse my language, and this is not a good situation, were the ones who got through. But they didn't stop believing that somehow they would go through. And going to Dr. Page's thing about the understanding. So I guess they had a felt sense of where they were, and it was something they held on to. So it's almost faith in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's a beautiful quote.
Good, yeah.
And what it
You'll
speaks,
find it online.
what it speaks to is the shadow side of hope is despair. And so how is it we hold a context of hope without creating a specific expectation of what it looks like? Because it's when we have a specific expectation that we are hoping for, which is getting attached to something, that then we have the of disappointment. And so it's those 2 things, and that quote brings that beautifully to life.
What about the saying, expect the worst and hope for the best? I sometimes pull it out. Sometimes I think it's too discouraging to people. So expect the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That's our work in
Oh,
the
is it?
team.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's, so we're putting in systems and preparing people and all of that for worst case scenario, and we're hoping that nothing will happen.
And that you never have to use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Yeah.
Look, Paige, I got a question for you, if I could. It's back to the
Yeah,
sort of
of
leadership piece of. I'm currently working with an organisation that want to, change the way they work and make it more psychologically safe, all those good things.
Yeah.
There's a question in my mind about whether the leadership, the executive, has said, go away and get all our leaders trained up, but whether they really believe in it themselves. And my sense is to not go in right at the top, but to go in at a couple of levels down and sort of treat the executive in parallel, because to try to get the executive to come on board completely, I don't know if that's going to work. Anyway, what's your in developing leader? Because you said you talked earlier in this session just about influencing right at the top. What's your sense around approaches to changing where you might not tackle the very top level?
Yeah. And so is it specifically around psychological safety or psychosocial safety? Is there a specific agenda to your work, Chris? Because it can sometimes influence.
It's just changing the way they work. They've got an old leadership style, which is what a lot of those very smart people would have come up in, and the organisation's saying you need to work as teams more. You've got young PhDs coming through, etc.
Yeah.
So it's more around changing that and the very science back. So I think I'm clear they need to see, oh, here's the benefits of it. But there's a kind of question mark in my mind. Often I've seen this happen before. You know, the executive gets you or I in to run something for the leaders underneath them, but not for them. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've had it happen a number of times, and so there are a couple of different ways to answer the question. So one, I'm going to answer it first from what's the most effective way to create change in an organization, and often it's from the middle out in terms of cultural change, right? Because we know that 70% of team member experiences are mediated by their immediate supervisor. That's the work of Gallup. And so if we want to change the lived experience of culture, take the middle layers of management and do the work with them. And that's how you're going to have most, if you like, informal cultural impact, because the lived experience of most team members will change if you leverage up the cultural leadership capacity of the middle leaders. And then the second part of that is go to the exec or the leaders above and go, you are now the glass ceiling for cultural change in this organization, because I'm creating capacity from the middle out, and that will grow until it's squashed by the level of capacity it reaches. And so until the tiers above are also able to lift and expand in a relevant and appropriate way for their levels, they won't look the same, but there will be an expansion at those levels above. You are the limiting factor in the cultural change in this organization. And so it's kind of a two-tier approach. Absolutely get in with the middle leaders and create that and start to measure the change of the lived experience of team members or customers or whatever that looks like for the organization you're working with. And then a strong message up that says you are now the problem to the senior leadership group, because they are.
Yeah. Beautifully put. Yeah, I was kind of thinking not quite the middle. It's slightly above the middle, but just on the executive, you know, that's sort of the top, what's the word? Quartile? Something up there, but not the very top. That's great. Nice. You are now the glass ceiling. I might reflect that back. No, thank you. That's really helpful.
Oh, good. Di, anything coming up? Anything else you'd like to chat about before we close out the session?
No, it's all been really good. You've just given me some really fresh ways of thinking. Like I often use the circle of control, circle of concern in some of the leadership sessions that I run, and really thinking about, you know, that pit for energy where we're focusing on the things that concern us, but we have no control or no influence over. Getting people to sort of think, well, yeah, what is your island? Come back to your island. It's a really great way of getting people to think, okay, well, that's not my island. I can't influence that. This is my island. I'll influence it, and then put my ripple out that hopefully will maybe even create a tsunami that will wash over the other islands. But, you know.
And the thing is, sometimes I speak about, and if you've got something where your concern or your investment is high, but your influence is low, just go in with eyes wide open. I'm not, you know, directing that, don't bother with that at all, but go in with eyes wide open that it might take longer, it might take more energy, you know, you might need to pick it up and put it down depending on what's going on. So it needs to almost become like a passion or a hobby project that's here on the side while you do the main focusing of where you're going to have most influence. Yeah,
but that really links in really well with what you've just said around that cultural change from the glass ceiling, because a lot of the work we do is with up and coming managers, and they go, well, how come you're telling us this? How come the managers don't do it this way? And it's around that, well, you know, this is the way they've been shown to manage over years. Getting them to change is really hard. You've got to be the change. So I love hearing that from the middle. So it all does really work in together. So thank you.
Beautiful.
No, I was running this program on Challenging Conversations on Friday, and it's never the people who turn up that really need it most. Do you know what I mean? Like, because the ones that really need it the most don't have the insight, or maybe they don't have the esteem, the self-driven esteem to allow themselves to be imperfect. It's always kind of the others that have a bit of insight and think, oh, maybe I'm getting this wrong. I'll go and do some training. So
That's so true that when it's volunteerism, it's the people who volunteer that are often the most aware and are able to do the work that they need to. Yeah.
That's what I was
for
trying to
sure.
say. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming along. We'll be having another one end of month. So it's going to be in about 3 weeks' time, because fingers crossed, my new book, The Leaders Ecosystem, will be available then. And so I'll be kind of talking and walking through the different ideas there, 9 different essays on different topics that create an ecosystem of tools and ideas for leaders to navigate complex and changing environments. So we'll be sharing that out via email and inviting anyone along. So if you've got friends, family, colleagues that you think would enjoy that conversation, please do invite them along. But thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Hope
Have
it
a great
goes well
few
with
weeks,
the book.
guys. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.